Why is this guy doing so well?
That is very scary. Leave that
man. Hello, and welcome to the League Bound podcast, where we break down some of the best draft prospects and the rising stars of the NBA. I'm your co-host, Branden. Jake, how are you doing today?
Doing good, man. We got a fun episode coming up, breaking down Dalton Knecht and a couple other interesting things happening this week, Cam.
A lot going on this week. Juju Watkins, big performance. We have rivalry coming up. A lot of things going on.
All right. So let's waste no time and let's get into this week's podcast. You know, with our second episode, we want to kind of try to get into the guys for next year's draft class because, you know, people always talk about how this year's class isn't the most fun at the top, but you look at next year's guys, you look at some of the archetypes, the builds of those players, like the amount of combo guards, forwards at the top who can just flat out score. And then you have Cooper Flagg, obviously, who he generates a lot of attention. So I just want to hear, you know, I know I myself, I haven't done my full deep dive, but I am excited to, you know, see more of these guys. So what are your guys' thoughts on this class at the moment?
I think it's definitely interesting, just starting with the two Rutgers commits with Ace Bailey and Dylan Harper. We were talking before we even got going today that I don't know if it's ever happened where Rutgers has put up two top 5 picks in the same draft class. And they're obviously very talented, but you think back to the 2019 class with Zion, there were a lot of guys who out of high school were expected to be one and dones and be in that top 5 that ended up, you know, falling out a little bit. So you never know how these guys are either going to excel or maybe drop out of it.
Yeah, Ace Bailey, he's impressive, man. He's one of the toughest shot makers I've seen in a long time. And Dylan Harper, he's like he's what you would think a small guard would be, but he has all of those intangibles, the way he moves the ball, the way he can score in different crafty ways. But he's a big guard. He's almost 6'6". So he's a very interesting prospect. Not very many comparisons in recent years of kids that are built like him with that level of talent. So he's very interesting prospect to watch. That's definitely a game I'm looking forward to next year.
Yeah, I think one player I'm also pretty excited about, you know, Trey Johnson. I know he was actually number 1 for a little bit until Flagg reclassified, and then, you know, some of these other guys overtook him. But I think, you know, he is a little bit raw in some ways, but I do think his game is also really smooth, and, you know, we're going to see him in the Big 12 at Texas. I think another thing that's interesting too, though, like Jake kind of mentioned it a little bit, but with these, you know, recruit rankings, you know, obviously as the season goes on, they're going to change and they're going to fluctuate. So it's really going to be interesting to see, you know, where the, what word am I looking for? Like what the perspective on these guys is going to be. But I think one person I'm genuinely curious, not only because he's number 1, but because the games I have watched him, you know, defensively, I think the stuff is there. But offensively, I kind of wonder, you know, if all of that dominance that he has is going to translate. So what are your guys' thoughts on, you know, Flagg, and do you guys think that he'll still be the number 1 guy when this is all said and done?
I like Flagg. I think there's some issues maybe with athleticism and just some fundamental things like getting low on his drives that he needs to really work on. But as far as his offensive ability, I don't think Mount Vernon really he gets a chance to showcase everything he can do with so many good players. You have to really play within the team, which I think is a little bit similar to how it'll be at Duke, but I think they'll give him a little more leeway. I think if you watch his main elite highlights in the summer and some of those games, he shows a lot of creation, little flashes, Jason Tatum here and there with a lot of step-back jumpers he shoots. If the key to his offense would be how good he shoots it over an extended period of time. If he can really get his jump shot to fall consistently, he'll be worth that number 1 spot. I don't think, however, I don't think he ends at number 1. I think Ace Bailey will probably end at the top of the class just because he has all those creation skills. He has the ability to play defense, even though he chooses not to a lot. but his motor, rebounding the ball, and the athleticism mixed with that level of skill, I think is a surefire number one.
I just want to say one thing though, unrelated to his game at all, but I think over the summer, over his like time in AAU, he earned the nickname "the main event." I think that is the hardest nickname of all time.
Nah, that's
I'm
hard.
Sorry. I'm
that's
sorry.
very hard.
But yeah, I'm kind of like you. I'm not sure if he'll end up number one. But another guy who I'm like really high on too is VJ Edgecombe, just because the athleticism that he has. Like, okay, he might not necessarily be the best player in this draft, but I'm just a sucker for highlight type of players, and he's another one of those guys. But you kind of talked about Ace Bailey. You know, he has some of those same athletic tools. So I think I'm just excited because especially after this class, and I feel like it's been a while since we've had a class where guys at the top are all just kind of bucket getters, you know? I feel like it's always usually like, oh, they're just really good defenders or, you know, two-way playmakers, whatever it is. So I think it'll just be kind of a fun group of guys.
Yeah, this class reminds me a lot of the one that just passed. Like, there's a lot of really big guards, athletic players, but the difference is this class can shoot the ball at a very high clip. There's a lot of, like you said, there's a lot of bucket getters in the class. I really like Isaiah Evans. I really like Jalil Bethea, Boogie Flan. Like, there's a ton of guys who are, like, bigger guards or even the smaller guards. Like, they have really, like, the shooting. Steph Curry's influence on like youth basketball is like really starting to shine. Like, these guys can really shoot the basketball from far, and they're not scared to take the shots. Like, if they get it, it's going up. So
For sure.
It's also interesting. You look at least right now, the projected like top 10. It's a lot different than this year's class because it's mostly college players. There's a couple of G League guys in there, and then the big man from NBA Academy. But this year, I feel like a lot of the hype is down just because potentially the top 2 or 3 players are not playing on the mainstream level right now. So I definitely think that has a lot to do with some low hype combined with a little bit less talent. But do you think there's any of these wings that are very athletic that could see a fall, like kind of like we saw out of high school? Nasir Little was one of the top wings, and then he went to North Carolina, had a pretty good freshman season, but ended up falling, I think, into like the 20s for Portland. It's just hard to gauge. Like, it's very easy to just take high school ranking and project that into, mock draft spot. But the truth is, all these guys are probably not going to finish where we're kind of seeing them projected right now.
Yeah. Well, I think a good portion of that too is, I'm just trying to think about the rosters that some of these guys have, but I think it also is kind of going to depend on who's around them, because at the end of the day, I think the reality of it is, because like where they're at right now, like they might still drop, but I still think that if they're still in a position where they have a lot of freedom, they'll still probably make it in the lottery, I'd feel like. But as far as a guy who might drop, I'm not too sure, honestly, because I feel like they're all kind of in situations where they can kind of blossom.
Yeah, it's almost too early to really see who's going to do that. But
yeah, I would say VJ Edgecombe is someone to watch for. I think his college decision may have saved him, though. I feel like Baylor does a really good job of getting their guard/wings to the NBA. But he's someone with like a shorter wingspan, which NBA teams like are red flagging at the moment. So I would say he's someone to watch on that end as far as who can drop. But I feel like a lot of these kids pick places that will actually boost them forward. So I would say another one maybe be Trey Johnson. I really like his game, but they've not had the best track record of development over the last couple of years. But I think he may just be talented enough to kind of get over it.
So normally on this podcast, we don't talk about women's basketball, but I think that the talent that they have right now is just too insane to not talk about it. You have not only the players in this draft class, but you have Juju Watkins, who's going to be available in a few years, and she just dropped 50 points. Now, this wasn't 50 points against like some random nobody, Cal, Southern, Fullerton, whatever. This was against Stanford, who at the moment of this podcast is the number 4 ranked team in the nation.
I think it was on the road too.
On the road too, yes, you're right. So I I feel like, women's basketball gets a lot of flack and they get clowned a lot, but I feel like they're in a really good spot going forward just because you look at all the stars that they have and you look at Juju's performance last night, like she looked insane.
Yeah.
I think she had like 6 threes, she was knocking down many pull-ups too. Like it was a masterpiece at all 3 levels.
Yeah. I mean, it's very easy to say that Caitlin Clark is the best player in women's college basketball. And, she's in her final year. She's going to be moving on. But I don't know if there's somebody more talented right now in college in the NCAA and women's basketball than Juju Watkins. We're seeing all these things about Caitlin Clark breaking, records for scoring in a career. I feel like that's in the future for Juju Watkins. If she's as a freshman putting up these monster numbers, they're going to force her to play 4 years at USC, or if she ends up transferring, I doubt it. But pretty much right from the beginning of the season, they had an early game against Ohio State where she just dominated. I've been kind of on the feeling that she is probably the best and maybe the most entertaining player, right up there with Caitlin Clark as a freshman, which is pretty impressive stuff.
Yeah, she's someone that I've kind of became aware of when she was in high school at Sierra Canyon, like just watching a couple of her highlights. And she's serious. Like, she's one of the best women's players I've ever seen. Mm-hmm. I agree with you that I think she's probably the most talented player in women's basketball, which really sucks that she can't leave right away. I think for the WNBA's future, allowing girls to leave earlier, especially when they get to build fan bases like quickly, is big for their survival going forward. But as far as Juju just herself, she's an elite shot creator, and like her jump shot is it's pure. Like it's a lot of her highlights in Stanford, the ball didn't hit the rim.
Yeah,
she's insane. Like she doesn't have the flashiest handle, but it works. Like it moves people and it gets her space. And it's something like, I think she could play in the WNBA right now. How about
100%.
For sure.
And I understand why there's a difference between, the one and done rule being in the NBA and the 4 years for WNBA. A lot of it has to do with the money and the contracts that are available. But we've seen NBA players in the past go and still get their degree later on in their career if they leave early. I don't understand why in women's college basketball they don't have that same opportunity. Like, the season's shorter, they play in the summers. They could, spend their time outside of that. If they're not playing overseas or something, they could go do the same thing that the guys in the NBA have the opportunity to do. And we've seen a recent example with Paige Beckers had that insane hype going into her freshman year, dealing with huge injuries. And luckily for her, she's still, playing at an elite level and is probably going to be one of the top picks this year. But that's not the case for all players. And sometimes when you have that hype and something bad happens, like an injury, sometimes you don't recover and your career can be derailed just because of a stupid rule that makes you stay long.
Mm-hmm. I think, you kind of touched on it a bit too, but we all know that quote from Angel Reese where it's like, if you're good enough, like, it's almost more beneficial to stay from a financial standpoint just because NIL and stuff. But, you can, and when you get to the WNBA, you can get those endorsements. But for whatever reason, it feels like women's college basketball is just drawing more attention than the WNBA. But I'm also hopeful that, because we have so much talent, it's not going to happen right away. Like, it's probably going to take some time. But like, as more and more players start to really show out and come in. And I feel like, this class and when Juju goes in, it's really going to help the WNBA. And you also think about the talent that the WNBA has now with, like, just look at the finals this year. Like, that was probably the most hyped final series of all time. Mm-hmm. You had the Aces, the Liberty, and it was a decent series too. And you have more young talent coming in. So, you're hoping that after time, you'll kind of see that start to change. And with the influx of young players, they'll just realize, like, you guys can make an impact right away.
Yeah, to you guys' point, I think college basketball for women's is a lot bigger at the moment. And I think that's mostly because the players that, like, people are really genuinely excited about are younger. Like if you just took women's basketball as a whole, if I say women's basketball, the first names that come to mind are the Caitlin Clarks, are the Angel Reeses, are the Juju Watkins, and I think that's when the WNBA is kind of hurting itself a little bit.
Yeah.
And I understand why, because there's only so many teams and there's only so many jobs, and you've seen like a lot of top picks in the WNBA draft don't make the team, or make the team and they're off the team within like the first 3 years of their career. So it's a tough thing, but I think the expansion coming up with them moving teams to I think they're getting a new San Francisco team. I think that'll help, and I think increasing the number of roster spots will be I think those are the right steps to take to get rid of having your best talent waste away in college, which, like you guys said, is just more time they can get hurt before they get to the WNBA. And it's after you play so long in college, your game has no choice but to become systemized. It becomes it's almost like you're putting a player in a box. When you have high school kids, they play a lot freer, and while they probably need to work on the fundamentals a little bit more, it creates a more entertaining brand of basketball in a way. That's why I think some of the WNBA, some of the hate they get is just because it's a lot of system play, and it's because all those players spent 4 years in college.
Yeah.
That would be something interesting to kind of see and get a kind of player's perspective on, because you hear NBA players, Gilbert Arenas, he went on his podcast and he talked about how high school ball for his game was more beneficial than the college. So you almost wonder, what do WNBA players think about that? You have a lot of high-level coaches in basketball and women's basketball, like Gino, but you do wonder if the play style in high school kind of is more similar to professional basketball. But I guess, somebody will talk about it at some point. But let's jump right into our breakdown for the week. We're doing the Tennessee fifth-year senior, Dalton Knecht, the 6'6" forward, averaging 20.1 points per game, 4.6 rebounds, 1.8 assists, and he's shooting 48% from the field. Now, he's a guy who he didn't really get any attention until this year for obvious reasons, because before this, he was at a smaller school. I think it was Northern Colorado.
Yep.
And he just transferred to the SEC, and he's producing at a really good rate. He's now projected to be the SEC Player of the Year, but he's also got his name into first round talks, and he's even considered to be a lottery pick right now. So, and he's a guy who I really enjoy watching, and I think he's just kind of a fun player.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. You look at his box score so far this season, and when you look at some of the bigger games on their schedule, like you see Wisconsin, Purdue, Kansas, UNC, Illinois, those are usually his best games. And pretty much since conference play has started in the SEC in early to mid-January, the last, 6 games here, he's gone for 28, 36, 39, 25, 32, and 31, which in college basketball in a 40-minute game is elite scoring. Mm-hmm. So, I don't know if it's his experience or if it's just the way that Tennessee works with him in the offense, but he has been on a heater in the month of January, and it doesn't seem like it's going to stop anytime soon. Yeah,
it looks like Tennessee's really giving him the keys. This is a kid I'm definitely not, as a Kentucky fan, I'm definitely not looking forward to him playing my team today. We're shooting this on Saturday before the game, so definitely a little scared of that. But the most impressive thing to me is that he's maintained his production from Northern Colorado, which a lot of times when you see kids transfer from mid-major to low-major schools to a big school, you'll see a dip in numbers. But he's maintained his production while playing less minutes. So it's he's been a lot more efficient. He's cut his turnovers down almost in half. He's one of those players that just knows how to play the game. He just has a feel for it. He's a bigger guard/wing. He runs the pick and roll really well. He can shoot it at a high clip. And he's sneaky athletic. If you watch his tape, you would think this is just like a jump shooter when you look at him, but turn on his highlight tape, within 30 seconds, he's dunked on someone, he's finishing high above the rim. He has really long arms, which I think project go out the next level. And he also has a lost art that guards really don't have anymore, is when he has a smaller guard put on him, he just takes him right to the post.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he has a move where he just dribbles, one dribble, pull up over someone in the post, and it's getting him the versatility of his scoring I think is what allowed him to maintain his level of production at Tennessee.
I mean, yeah, you talk about his offensive versatility. He's capable of doing it all. I think, when he gets into the league, his handle isn't extremely crazy, but I do think that, he's showing that he can be kind of a secondary ball handler when he does get into the league. And also, you talked about the athleticism. Like, he just has really good bursts, when he's operating in that pick and roll. I don't want to say he's necessarily like a stop and go type of player, but you can tell like he'll kind of catch people off guard when he just, explodes right to the rim, and sometimes he dunks, or it'll just be like a smooth finish. The one thing I will say though, I think he is capable of, playing in the mid-range, like in the in-between area, but I feel like I would like to see him be a little bit more efficient from there. But I think that's just going to kind of come with, really finding your spots, and, it'll come with more experience. Like, I know they say he's older right now, but I don't think he's had to see nearly these elite type of defenses that he's seeing right now. And I think the fact that he's even taking it, and you've taken into account the size that he has, I think that it'll translate pretty well into the league.
And some mock drafts are projecting him as low as like the early 20s. And to me, Dalton Knecht is just a classic example of like a role player that's going to get drafted by one of the better teams in the NBA, like a playoff team, and he's going to have that instant impact off the bench. Like right now on Tankathon, he's at 21 to the Atlanta Hawks. That's like a perfect, I mean, they've been trying to find that three-man, that wing for years. They've gone for Jalen Johnson and Sadiq Bey even, I think. So they, are trying to solidify that wing position, and maybe he could be somebody that is the man to do it. I mean, they have the shooting with Trae Young and DeJounte Murray. They got the bigs with Capella, and, maybe Knecht can slide in there and finish out that starting five.
Yeah, you guys bring up an interesting point about his age and where he might be drafted. If you were an NBA GM, would you take the risk of drafting Knecht early, even though he's older? I think he'll be 23 by the time the draft comes around, versus taking a player like Matas Buzelis or Jacoby Walter, who are maybe not as good right at this moment, but have more time in the NBA for them to reach that level.
That is a good point though, because I think when you have a higher pick, there's more pressure to really pick someone who's going to pan out. But at the same time, when you have a younger player, and in a class like this, like you're not too sure like what these younger guys are going to turn into. Mm-hmm. Knecht is interesting though. But I say the one reason why I'd still probably go with a younger guy who has a little bit more defensive upside, just because I don't think he's necessarily incapable as a defender, but he's just not really, I think it's also the role that he plays at Tennessee, but he just doesn't really get involved in a lot of their actions and stuff. He's not really a point of attack guy, but I think he can be, a good team defender. He seems to rotate pretty well. But to answer your question, I feel like it's tough, but I'd probably want to go for somebody younger, just because at the end of the day, it's kind of like a similar thing with Reed Sheppard. Like, say he doesn't really pan out, I feel like you're going to be in more pressure to just kind of swivel through the guys on your roster and like find, it's kind of tough.
I think it has a lot to do with team as well. Like right now, the Thunder could potentially have 12 and 13. With how good the Thunder have been this year, they don't really need to be adding a ton of more young guys. I feel like someone like Dalton Knecht, maybe at that 13 spot, if they do end up getting that pick, could be someone off the bench that is pretty valuable. Just another shooter, another, offensive generator that Shea and Chet can get some support when they're having an off night or they just need to head to the bench for 5 or 6 minutes to catch their breath. So I think there's going to be teams like even the Magic currently at 16. They're another team that's like right on the cusp of being a perennial playoff team where they don't need to add or reach on like a 19-year-old just to see if it works out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I feel like his sweet spot in the draft coming up will be the late lottery to around the mid-20s. I feel like if you're higher in the draft, while he might be a better player now and it'll look good, like you'll probably look like you hit on a prospect as a GM, I feel like your team's not going to be good anyway. Like the Pistons aren't 1 year away. They're not one guy away from being an NBA playoff team most likely. So it almost hurts more than it helps to draft someone like Knecht because you'll be better now, but all that'll do is kind of put you in the 10 to 12 range in the draft instead of 1 or 2. And it'll make you miss out on the prospects we were talking about like in the 25 draft.
Right.
Like, so I feel earlier in the draft, I would lean more towards like a Reed Shepherd or players like that because while they might not be better right at this moment, by the time they get to Dalton Knecht's age, they'll have 3 to 4 years of real NBA experience. And even if it's not worked out at that point, they will just be so more acclimated to the NBA game. Most likely they'll be better and they fit your timeline. I think it's important for the teams at the top to draft guys who fit their timeline.
Plus, I mean, I really do think he's a player who probably would benefit because if he were on a team later in the draft, just because, like you said, the timeline that he has and, like, I think you want to get the most that you can get out of him, like, right now. And to me, another team, it might be a little bit too low for him. But I just think about the playoffs last year. Cleveland, they needed a third guy
I agree.
out there to produce. And I think right now, Tankathon has him at 23. So to me, I think that would be another fit that I would like. And plus, he's not just a catch and shoot guy. Like, he can actually create for himself and others around him. And plus, the defense, I don't think he has to necessarily be as big of a threat, because they're already a pretty good defensive team. So,
yeah, he's a little bit shorter than Cedi Osman was, but he would almost be like an improved or like an upgraded Cedi Osman. And Cleveland, they liked him off the bench, and he came and gave some decent minutes when he was still there. But I feel like Dalton could do a little bit more with the ball in his hands. And a lot of times in the playoffs last year, they were relying on Karis LeVert to help out on offense at that 3-man position. But if you could bring in, Knecht off the bench and still let LeVert do the work on offense in the playoffs, it could be a pretty nice addition, I would say.
Yeah, I would say another team to look out for that I think he may be a fit is Miami, who's having around the 15-16 range in the draft right now. I feel like there's a little bit of overlap between him and Hero of what they do, but I feel like if Knecht hits big enough, you could possibly look into moving Hero into some other pieces, which I know they've talked about at different times. They've considered moving him. Or possibly even keep them and play them together. I feel like he's one of those Heat guys that aren't like your usual pick. Like, they're not your super young, talented guy, but they can just play. Like, I feel like he would fit in perfectly with some of the guys they have there now.
Yeah, and I mean, they've already shown with this past draft with Jaime Jaquez, they're not afraid to go out and draft an older guy. So that's definitely a huge possibility for them.
Look what Jaime Jaquez is doing. Honestly, that's what I was going to say. Like, Knecht, he could be that type of player for somebody. For me, I just think he'll be better off if he gets drafted later, gets put on a contender who needs a wing and a offensively capable wing. I think he'll be okay. And I do think, he's not going to go that high necessarily, but I think we'll be talking about him in a year or so.
Yeah. I don't think he'll necessarily go super high, but I do think there's a possibility of him sneaking up draft boards the closer we get, especially as we get past the combine. He has like a really long wingspan, and I think that wingspan with shooting ability, I think some teams, especially with like the lack of elite prospects at the top, might convince themselves that while we kind of all know that the Pistons aren't one guy away, they might think differently. And I think you could see some teams at the top convincing themselves that they're better than they are and maybe taking a chance on somebody who may be older, but theoretically could help them now.
And he's definitely someone that is going to play in the 5-on-5s at the combine. He doesn't have enough cachet with his name where he would want to sit out. And he's such an experienced player, and he's already doing it at a high level in college, where he's going to go into those scrimmages and play really well. That's another thing that could boost him up, because whenever you get that head-to-head matchup against other draft prospects in a combine scrimmage, if you can be the best player on the court, like you're going to move up. So
I do want to ask something though, because you think about where we are in the season. It's February 3rd, and we're a month out from March, and I just think about a guy like Jordan Hawkins from last year who, if I remember correctly, he was like first round, but he wasn't really a lock. But then he went on that crazy tournament run, and then he solidified himself as a lottery pick. And for Knecht, he's considered to be, he's probably going to win SEC player the way things look right now. Tennessee is it would help them if they had more guys who kind of produced around him, but they're still, a top 10 team right now. So what do y'all think it would take, if it's possible, for him to slide even higher, like top 10, maybe even just as high as the top 10, because if his team has success, I think, his stock will just continue to rise. He's not necessarily a great two-way player, but if he shows he can lead a team to a championship or near there, at the end of the day, winning is what all these teams are trying to do in the long run.
Yeah, I think he'll definitely have to do it on a big stage. I think if he can have like a run like he's had in his last 6 games, like we talked about, where he's averaging almost 30 points in like the tournament, if he can get to like the Final Four, average somewhere between 25 to 28 points, and really has that Tennessee team like getting national level buzz, I feel like then he'll slide up in the draft for sure. And I think he'll also get another bump when they get his official measurements in, because he looks like he might be just a little bit taller than 6'6" as well. So
yeah,
that'll definitely give him a boost, and a big March would put him probably around the 6 to 8 range. But it's hard for me personally to see Tennessee as a team making that big of a run. Yeah. I don't think they have enough around him. Like, they have good players. I just think in March, the lack of shooting from other positions, especially like their point guard and some of their forwards like Josiah Jordan James, I don't know if that'll hold up against teams, especially like they just seem like a team to me that'll be one of those 2 or 3 seeds that get upset like first night.
Yeah.
It almost plays into his hand though, because if he is able to move that team deep, it's going to be because he's going off and he's clearly just better than everyone else out in the court, and he's just carrying not a bad Tennessee team. They're still, I think, top 20, I want to say. Are they still doing that well?
No, they're like top 10.
Yeah, I was going to say.
They're highly ranked. They've been on a little bit of a run, but you have seen at times this year, like against UNC, they got ran off the court. And they were down on the road to a Georgia team that's not that great either.
I want to say right now they're actually 5. Yeah, because I know Kentucky's 10, right?
Yeah, but I think Kentucky might drop it.
Yeah, because they lost to Florida. Yeah,
which that was crazy. I think Dillingham had like a ton of minutes off the bench, kind of returning to action. But
yeah, Dillingham and Shepard scored 20 plus. I think Wagner really being hurt kind of hurt them in that game.
Today was kind of a shorter pod, but nonetheless, I think we still had some good discussion. Remember, if you guys enjoyed the podcast, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Because if you don't subscribe, what are you doing? If y'all want to follow me on social media, my IG is Branden.Blue with 2 E's. And last week, I actually said my Twitter, the wrong Twitter. So it's Branden_Blue25 if you want to follow me on Twitter.
There you go. I was wondering why you didn't get any increase in the followers. Mine just Jacob Schrantz on Instagram and Twitter.
On Twitter, it's Cameron, KIN 6356, if I'm not mistaken. Don't ask why that's the name. That's the name. On Instagram, it's Cameron K1NG_. I believe so. If not, just find it.
Socials all over the YouTube description, so you can find it there too. Don't worry about that. Twitter at Brody Wilken, Instagram at Broderick Wilken. Most importantly, you can subscribe to the League Bound podcast on YouTube. We have a Spotify podcast under the name League Bound as well. And you can also find us on Twitter for extra updates and tidbits at _LeagueBound_.
Yup.
Stay tuned to our Twitch account. Start streaming.